Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the ELT Conference, day 2. For many of you, this will be day 1. So a big welcome to you all to our conference. We really hope that you'll have an amazing day of learning and thinking and professionally developing yourselves. Welcome to teachers from all over the world today. We're delighted to be able to offer this event for free and to all English UK members and non-members. Any ELT practitioners from anywhere in the world can join us today. So that's fantastic. We're delighted to see you all join us. We're able to offer this event for free thanks to the generous support of our sponsors. So a big thank you to Cambridge Assessment English, to Ensley Insurance, to Language Cert, to Macmillan Education, and to Trinity College London. We are encouraging you to take part in this session. If you have any questions, please do use the Q&A box. Please use the Q&A box rather than the comments, just a bit easier for us to collate. And if something terrible happens to the internet in North London and I drop away and things close, just hold on a second and then re-enter using the original link. That's it from me. I'm going to pass over to Chris Farrell. Chris is going to talk to us about the classroom in 2021, considering hybrid, blending, and socially distancing. So over to you, Chris.
Good morning, Tim. Good morning, everybody. Me and Tim were just joking that nobody wants to make big predictions about the classroom of 2022 or the classroom of late 2021. So I'm just doing the classroom of tomorrow, basically, or even yesterday. We're going to look a little bit at the classroom of 2021. I'm just going to share my screen. As Tim was saying, there's a couple of particular areas we're going to focus on. We're going to look particularly at hybrid learning, blended learning, and socially distancing. The reason we're looking at hybrid is that if you put the word hybrid into a conference proposal, it tends to get picked nowadays because hybrid is one of the big things that people want to talk about. So we're not going to talk about it too much, but it's helpful to get the talk noticed. I know we really will. When we talk about the classroom of 2021, you might think, what are we back doing the classroom in 2017, 2018, because there's every year there's a classroom in this particular year. What I really want to focus on is the impact of the pandemic and what the classroom is going to look like for us coming out of the pandemic and re-normalizing, or whatever words you might want to use for post-pandemic education, not just ELT. And it's really occurred to me and to a lot of people in the past 12 months that the classroom obviously is the essential component of a school, of your education system, and all of the primary changes and all of the primary kind of driving towards quality in online education, quality in blended, quality in whatever is happening within the classroom. This is why when I was putting this together, I realized there was a slight religious theme to it. And obviously, you can't go a day without quoting Thomas Aquinas. Outside of the church, there's no salvation. And what I'm going to put forward is outside of the classroom, there's no salvation for our post-pandemic education sector. I think the classroom is where we have to focus on the impact of the changes, and the classroom is where we have to really emphasize extra training, extra support for teachers, extra support for students especially. So what I am also aware of, I'm conscious of the fact that a lot of the stuff which it has happened in the past 12 months and will be happening is perhaps part of a sped up natural evolution. So already people were integrating technology more and more into their lessons, into the curriculum in general. So we do have to understand, is this an aspect of a revolutionary change, or is it an aspect of evolutionary change? So it is important to consider, are we blowing away the previous structures, and are we starting something sudden and dramatic, or is this a further a speed up of a slow and gradual change? And all we're doing really today is asking questions, and we're beginning to think, I do that in my practice. Have I done that only because of the impact of the past 12 months, or was I going in that direction anyway? So for example, I'm integrating this technology into my classroom. Is this a natural progress of my teaching, or is this just something which I've done because I've had to, and it might work or not? So in quality teaching, we always look back on justification of classroom choices, and I do really think it's a massive time for teachers to be supported in reflective inquiry and that questioning and justification of what they're doing in the classroom. And unfortunately, teachers have been left to do this alone since the start of this. And now that institutions are reopening and moving forward, it's definitely something where institutions should support action research projects, supported experiments, classroom reflection, inquiry, in order for teachers to understand, why they're doing certain things and how they could meet the needs of learners, perhaps in a more efficient or effective way. That's not to say that what we were doing a year ago, we can't just do again, but it is important to think that there has been a shift. There has been a shift in education, and we do have to take advantage of this shift. We do have to see what what opportunities have arisen for us. I always really like to go back to Yeats' poem, "The Second Coming," and this particular verse, which I think sums up a lot of what we've gone through. Turning and turning in the widening gyre. It's not Jaya, it's gyre. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, and the center cannot hold. And I think it's been pretty clear over the past 12 months. The center hasn't held, or has it? What is our center? The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. So I want to focus a little bit on what is the center. What is the center when we talk about the classroom? What are our orthodoxy in terms of traditional classroom teaching? So what aspects do we say, yeah, that is a key cornerstone of classroom teaching? Has it held, or does it have to be modified, evolved, removed, or whatever? So I'm just going to go through a few of them. This is just part of a reflective inquiry for your practice. So obviously everybody's going to be slightly different, but I really want to get to the bottom of how malleable these cornerstones are. So if we look at something like the role of the teacher, and again, this comes up again and again and again, the role of the teacher in February 2020, whatever last year was, versus the role of the teacher now, have there been any fundamental changes in the way your role is actioned, in the way your role is actually delivered or achieved or defined even? And I just want you to put in the chat, if you can reflect back on the pre-pandemic world we all lived in, and the classroom that you will be going into tomorrow, how has your role changed in any way? So any comments that you have, any ideas that you have, please put them in the chat. I'd be very interested to see what you're thinking. Elizabeth, I will explain the difference between hybrid and blended. You've come to the right place. IT consultant, definitely. This has been an unexpected role that now we have to understand how to use Zoom and stuff. More technical, more personable, interesting, more personable. I don't know if I do it has to be more personable for me. I'm not sure. I suppose going back into, if you're back into a face-to-face socially distant classroom, maybe you do have to put students at ease a little bit more. Yeah, tech support, more considerate. Yeah, more empathetic as well, maybe. Yeah, I think, Penny, that was definitely the big thing for me, that almost the isolation, even though you might have staff meetings every now and again. God, the online stuff was quite isolating. Motivation, emotion, difficult factors for teachers, that collegial environment. Hello from Iran. Hello, Susan. Yeah, could you send to all panelists and attendees? Because I'm realizing that a lot of these are just to me. Could you send to all panelists and all attendees? Sorry, because these are, I think, just to me. So Michael says, I feel physically remote from my students. Yeah, definitely. Anne says, in a more personable way, smaller classes, more time to help individuals. Definitely. In a socially distant classroom, you do actually find that you have a little bit more time for one-to-one stuff. more closer to my students' proximity on screen. Yeah. So I'm going to go through all of these, and all of these is just, we don't have a long session. So what I wanted to do is to start off the day by allowing you to reflect on almost pre and post in some of these key cornerstones. And we have the role of the greater need for soft skills, definitely, Christine. And again, all panelists and attendees, if you could send to everybody, that would be great. The next is the role of students, because obviously we're considering what is the teacher doing in the classroom, and what are the expectations, what is our apprenticeship of observation, and what does that teach us. But also the learner's role has changed. If they're going from obviously online into a classroom where now it doesn't look like a traditional classroom, maybe if it's blended, if it's hybrid, if it's distance. So we do have to go back and think, actually, what are the learners doing? So can I ask you again to put in the chat to all panelists and all attendees, how do you think the role or the expectation of the learners may have changed? For me personally, I definitely think there's an issue with engagement with material, because previously they may have been expected to engage with a course book or handout or whatever, and now there's a lot of expectation of engagement with online stuff, or stuff which might be new for them. For more active role. Yeah, definitely, Michael. I completely agree with that. I think it's the past year has definitely shown that self-guided learning, self-directed learning is definitely something which should be a fundamental part of courses. So I know, I think I'm preaching to the converted, but you're not just obviously teaching a language, you're teaching students how to develop the language on their own. And I think this should be more emphasized in a class now. It should definitely be part of, if not teacher development programs, then big teacher training programs. Learners need to take more ownership. Danger with computer boredom. Yeah, there's definitely fatigue, isn't there, with students? Just even if it's online or blended, it almost feels sometimes like the tech is a barrier to real communication. They treat us like Amazon. Yeah, learners worry about connectivity. Learners have to be more active in smaller classes. Yeah, maybe there's no little downtime for them. They can't really hide. More aware of their learning styles. Interesting. Online silence in breakout rooms. So I have a couple more. I've chosen 4 cornerstones, and really it's just, we could chat about this all day, and we could reflect on actually how have things changed and what does that mean for us. So the role of the teacher, the role of the learners are kind of the massive overarching ones, but certainly the use of material and lesson planning and staging. There were 4 cornerstones. I just want to ask you, and you can continue on reflecting on how material has changed, how lesson planning and staging have changed. But I just want to ask you, what other cornerstones of teaching, of our profession, do you think have had to be malleable, have had to be adjustable, or certainly require some sort of reflection and review in current context? I'm certainly thinking of pastoral care. For me, like, pastoral care is one aspect which I never really considered in the traditional classroom, but with online and with the move to students who are being a little bit more stressed about what's happening, I think pastoral care has become another big cornerstone of teaching, which does need to be emphasized a little bit more. So put in the chat if you think there's anything else that we should focus on in terms of our teaching practice. Send to all panelists and all attendees. Personal interaction with students has had to change. Yeah, I think how we relate to each other has had to change. And this is connected to the fact that we have to rely on them a little bit more for their own education. Sometimes learners are more passive and not so interactive. So that's the role of the learners, really, isn't it? Elizabeth, that's a revolution. Everything needs to be rethought and our approach adapted. So that would be this big thing. And I want to break it down into, but what's that and how do we do that? What's that and how do we do that? Methods of feedback, competencies as a teacher. So this is one big area which I'd love to just do an hour session on teacher competencies and how we need to review and refocus on teacher competencies. Not only as part of our teacher development, but actually probably going back to preparatory training courses and saying that competency is way more relevant now than this competency. So therefore, X, Y, and Z. I suppose it's for us to reflect upon what's best practice and how much of best practice from February last year is the same as this year, or are there new models of best practice which we need to consider? Teaching is a noble job, should be interactive. Could you send to all panelists and all attendees so everybody can see? The disabled and disadvantaged are even more difficult to support. Yeah, definitely. Okay, great points. So again, we're not going to have all the answers today. It's for us to begin the conversation with things are not the same. We cannot just go back and say everything is fine. We do need to reconsider what the classroom looks like. When we say what does the classroom look like, we mean the cornerstones of best practice and how we can actually focus on each one, reflect upon each one, and think what else needs to be emphasized. The solutions which have been offered or which have been trialed in the past, hybrid is more of a 6 month, I don't know, 8 months, about 8 months since last June, July. Hybrid is one of the solutions which has come out of this, and I'm going to talk a little bit about hybrid. I'm not going to go on too much. Elizabeth asked earlier on, what's the difference between hybrid and blended? Like obviously there's massive definitions and kind of what you're doing, but the idea for blended learning is supposed to be you've got a blend in the use of technology in particular between synchronous and asynchronous contexts. So you might have the flipped classroom is, for example, an example of blended learning, where you might have your input sessions in an asynchronous context at home for the students, and then your practice sessions in the synchronous context. And there's some sort of technological link, and there is a clear blend between the two. Whereas hybrid is everything happening in the classroom. So I'm going to show you a picture of what a hybrid classroom looks like. This is all born out of I was part of the YALC working group on hybrid learning last year, where we did a lot of research into what is hybrid learning in mostly in the European, North American context. And we did a couple of sessions on that. And then I was also involved with Tom Kittle, John Gluo-O'Leary, and Sophie Mavridi on the research project into a survey of instances and attitudes to hybrid learning in language teaching organizations around the world as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And that research report is available for free. It's on Niall's website, I know, but if you Google that, you'll find it. It's really good. It has the opinions of the people who are engaging in hybrid, or the people who are potentially engaging in hybrid, from teachers to managers, and kind of how they're feeling about it, how they define it. Because obviously, because it all came about in a bit of turmoil, people have slightly different definitions of it. But this is typically what a hybrid classroom looked like. You have your face-to-face students there as they would be in a traditional. Thank you, Joanna. Yeah, I was like trying to think of the link that it is on Niall. This is the traditional classroom is happening, on one side, and then students are also zooming in, or they're involved. So there is the teacher's role is to facilitate learning for everyone in the room and online at the same pace, using similar or the same materials, and to achieve the same learning outcomes for everybody. And obviously the benefits are people can do this remotely. You can have more students involved. Yeah, I have reservations about whether I would like to be a student in this classroom. And this is an ongoing reflective and thought process for me. But hybrid learning is something which is happening in a lot of schools, whether through necessity due to the pandemic, or whether it actually works and the teachers have been trained properly to do it, and the tech is all there, and they're happy, they're happy to be engaged with it. But certainly it's to do with thinking of your own practice and thinking if the institution is willing to support that, and to support the teachers being trained how to do it, and the students are aware of their role. It's kind of a whole other thing to learn. So I would say the hybrid will continue in a lot of schools. It's popular in a lot of schools, but I do wonder, and I throw the question back to you to reflect upon how popular it will be in the long term, how useful it will be in the long term, how desirable it will be for students, whether they're face-to-face or online in that context, whether they'll want to actually engage with that. One of the big considerations I had from a teaching perspective, from a teacher training perspective, was the idea of what are the competencies? I think Michael mentioned teacher competencies. What are the competencies in a hybrid model? So when we look at best practice, you have to build the model as a school or as an organization, and really define what it is, and define what you want the teachers to do and be able to do, and you want the students to be able to do. and consider the learners, the needs of the learner, the constraints of the learners, and whether you're using hybrid just because you can, or whether it's actually beneficial for students. So a couple of points on hybrid. Again, could you send all panelists and attendees, Lee? The habit of hybrid has been formed. It would be tough to change the market away from it. I do wonder about the marketing, just as a side point, Lee, because if you're thinking about a hybrid classroom, like if I'm a student, a face-to-face student, I want the teacher to just be focused on me and the classroom. So I think selling a hybrid classroom to students who are going to be face-to-face is really tricky, because they're going to want to be in a traditional classroom or something which they recognize as a traditional classroom. So I don't know. I don't know how it will go. Obviously, we have to identify issues and find solutions. And this is a massive thing for me. And I've looked at hybrid a lot, and I really do think that we need to set a series of reflective questions for teachers in a hybrid class. So managers, trainers, teachers all understand what is best practice and how we can begin to ask certain questions about our practice and begin to find solutions. And then finally, obviously, there's massive bridging competencies. So competencies which are trained, which we're trying to do, competencies which are required, and then, you know, the bridge between the two and how we can actually go about creating that, because there's not even a framework for hybrid at the moment. It's very much in the ether. So that is a little focus on hybrid. And again, you know, there's lots of different sessions on hybrid, what hybrid look like. You know, there's live demos which are, you know, really, really useful. But I just want to give you a slight flavor of that's what it might look like going forward. Blended learning is something which we've been running with CES, been running teacher training programs for about 20 years. And the blended learning course for teachers is always really popular. So we've been looking at it for the past 15 years, 10 years, something like blended. And it's been really interesting to see what's happened to blended learning in the past 10 months, I suppose, because suddenly it's seen as a solution to everything, because people went online quickly and then they came back to the classroom. They're utilizing technology in the classroom, and frequently that's just being called blended. And the good news, and not to get all religious on people again, but blended learning covers a multitude of sins. So the blended learning brand can be used to justify, you know, a lot. You know, we've got lots of different models of blended learning. I mentioned flipped. You know, we've got flex model, rotation model. We've all of these different models which are used more frequently in a university context, a non-language learning context, but they have relevance for us as well. I think when people talk about blended learning in an ELT context, they frequently mean integration of technology into the classroom, and they frequently mean something like a flipped classroom. And that's fine. You don't have to be a purist to do it, but blended learning is not always just one thing. I think for us, and we can afford to be a little bit messy at the moment, it covers a range of things. If we look at what I think it means in ELT, what I think it means for us as teachers, the student learning at least is done in part through online learning. And you know, whether that's utilization of technology in the classroom or whether that's flipping the classroom, you know, we have to, that can be actualized in different ways. The students have control over when, where, which way, and how quickly they learn. So this is the aspect of the input sessions are given to the students, whether it's a video or whether it's something they have to read, and they can do it at their own pace. And this allows massively for differentiation and stuff like that. So there is big benefits for blended learning, or even, you know, little flavors of blended learning here and there. And the idea that the classroom and the online, the classroom and the non-classroom, the online aspect is they're mutually supportive, if that makes sense. There's not hello, Rosemary. Good afternoon from the Philippines. There's not a disconnect, and that's probably the argument that frequently, you know, there might be a use of technology which is not directly related to the learning outcome that happened in the actual classroom lesson. The idea for a blended learning model is the learning outcome is being achieved through a blend of both of them. It's not being achieved in the classroom and then practiced a little bit for homework. It's actually a combination of both is the achievement of the learning outcome. And that brings in all sorts of things, you know, like assessment and stuff like that. But this is where we are. I think when we talk about blended learning and we talk about classroom implications in particular, one thing or one model which we really have to remember and we really have to focus on again and again is the SAMR model of utilization of technology, and whether the technology you're using is primarily in order to substitute or augment your enhancement of traditional classroom use. So whether, the classic one is whether you're just using a PDF that you email to students or a photocopy, that's just substitution. It's not actually blending in any way. It's fine, but we just have to be clear that what we're really focusing on, if we're talking about blended learning or the full utilization of technology, is using technology to modify or redefine what we do. So using technology to really change what we do, and thinking of, again, what is my role? What's the role of the students, the use of material? How can I begin to integrate this technology in the way which is going to best fit this context, in the way which is going to best meet the needs of the learners and how they're engaging with technology, blah, blah, blah. So again, all we're doing is reflecting. We're thinking, have things changed? If I'm going to use Google Docs, what's the best way to use Google Docs in a classroom that will help me modify and redefine what I do? If I'm going to use TED Talks or whatever, how am I going to do that? Is it just going to be a substitution for the audio, or are we going to do it as a blended, flipped, blah, blah, blah thing? So it's reflection on your context and thinking, if I'm going to do this, let's do it to the maximum benefit of the students. Integration, Celia. Perfect, Celia. So when we look at concerns, let me just move that chat out of the way. Obviously the concerns, and this was raised when we talked about the role of the teacher, tech competencies. I definitely have a concern around assessment. And I do think that it's really tricky if you say, this is my learning outcome and it's going to be achieved through a blend of synchronous and asynchronous. It's really difficult for the teacher to assess how the success criteria were achieved if some students are doing it, some students are not doing it, some students are doing it at home, and it requires more teacher training. I know personally, I would have to really think, how a listening lesson, how am I doing that in a blended context, and how do I know they've got that? It just requires, for me, a rethink of my success criteria and my assessment methods, and then training, for teachers to sit down and hammer out what best practice is. And it's not something which we can say you take it off the shelf and it's ready. It does require reflection in your own context and actually finding the best way to do things with a reliance on what we know works. So obviously using what we know works, but then taking this and being able to actually have those conversations with colleagues really needs to be a collegial thing supported by the institution. Accessibility, again, is a concern, and it has been with online learning. Some students don't have access to certain tech or whatever. So if you're saying, everybody go home and watch this video for 10 minutes, it's the input video. Maybe the students don't have their own laptop, or if they can use out their phone. Maybe they don't have free time, so much free time at home. They want to get all their learning done in class. Or maybe also they live in a crowded space. They don't have time for this and that. So we have to also be sure that we're not excluding people by using blended learning components. We often think, what wrong could there be? Blended learning is nice and fancy. What negatives could possibly exist? But really, some people put aside those 2 or 4 hours, say, this is my learning time. I just don't have time outside that. And then we're saying, oh, actually, you're going to study the grammar at home and I'll just practice it here. So we do have to listen to the students as well. Sometimes the old ways are the best. And then finally, we want to look at the socially distant classroom. I'm just going to check the chat. This says, doesn't a lot, sorry, Greg, you sent all panelists. So I'm just going to read what you said. Doesn't a lot of this depend on the attitude of the students? Highly motivated students may engage with blended material away from the classroom, but average students may not. Yeah, and this is, if we go back, if we talk about attitude of the students, I kind of have that covered with differentiation. It again covers a multitude of sins, because differentiation is not only about ability, it's about aptitude, it's about motivation, it's about ensuring that you're meeting the learners at their level or slightly above their level of motivation of whatever. So yeah, there's big issues with blended learning and whether students are actually going to do it. So it does require the teacher to rethink every lesson they do and say, how can that actually work for my students in this context? Blending isn't just a case of using a bit of tech. It's really thinking, is this going to be beneficial to the students? And for some students, it won't be. So don't do it, I guess. I'm not saying don't do it, but if it's not going to be beneficial for the students, I wouldn't do it. Some students had a poor experience of online learning, so we have to convince them to give it a go with us. I definitely think that. I've noticed that when you go back last summer, when we went back to the classroom after online learning, students did not want to do a Mentimeter, or they didn't want to do, they just wanted paper, books, face-to-face. That could be temporary, I don't know. Chat, I can't resist a flashing chat box. Way of assessment is also a challenge in our online class. Yeah, assessment is incredibly difficult in an online class because we haven't been trained to do it, I guess. And it's also, you know, as a segue, not to be harsh on yourself as teachers, because a lot of this stuff is stuff which is beyond the remit of our preparatory training and beyond the remit of any further training. So we are a lot of the time feeling in the dark. Okay, I'm going to jump on. So when I talk about socially distant classroom, this has been going on for a while, but we, with Equals, we did a community of practice on the SDC, the social distant classroom, involving all of these schools. There's a couple of English UK members there. We had a couple of meetings on what the socially distant classroom looks like for you, for you going back to class. And then we decided to hammer out a few of the best principles. It's a definition of context and a few of the best principles. And it was really interesting because it was quite different all over Europe, mostly, and South Africa there as well. It was quite different in a lot of different contexts. But we had some principles that were similar. So when I talk about socially distant classroom, I'm talking about a classroom where there is distancing. So not everybody's vaccinated. So obviously there's distancing, and masks still exist in the classroom. There's a focus on static exercises, and that means that there's no mingles. There's no opportunity for spontaneous exercises, really. And this is, again, something that there's a bit of wiggle room, but generally the students are in their seats. A lot of schools have pods, whether it's pods of classes or whether it's pods of students or whatever. But this pod system makes extracurricular mingling really tricky, because I know in a lot of schools there was no common areas left open and stuff like that. Limited class sizes, which has already been mentioned. Issues with handouts and photocopying. A lot of schools banned photocopying because of infection transmission and stuff like that. Some schools were using partitions or staggering class times. Partitions would affect communication. They also affect students' attitude, I think, maybe. And then issues with collaboration, monitoring, correction, which were some of the primary ones which came up from the teachers. That there was really problems with collaboration with the students, and also collaboration with your colleagues. And then correction. Again, it goes back to teacher training, what we're trying to do and what we're able to do, and actually how do we correct in that context. So it was redefining what is best practice and being able to kind of try solve some of the problems together. What we looked at with Equals, with the community of practice, we broke it down into three big areas which required reflection and required revolution in some ways, evolution in some ways. Classroom management, so how we actually manage the class, interaction patterns, key teacher contact points and how they're actually done. Lesson planning, particularly timings. Some things were taking a little bit longer. We also had to plan for integration. We had to plan for spontaneous tasks because they can't be non-static. We also looked at lesson planning in terms of material, and I can't remember lesson planning in terms of, were the same learning outcomes which were achievable in a non-socially distant classroom, were they as achievable, or did success criteria have to change? So can you just do the same thing you were doing before with a few classroom modifications, or actually do you have to think, God, I can't get them to do a conversation between three people. I can't do some of these things, maybe. And again, it depended on the context. And then again, we come back to the integration of tech solutions. And that's ongoing. Some people are tech heavy, some people not. It really depends. So they were the three potential evolutions, revolutions, what they might look like for the classroom of literally tomorrow, not tomorrow's world, but literally tomorrow. The hybrid learning context, the blended learning context, and the socially distant context. And throughout it all, I always focus on teacher reflective inquiry, supported reflective inquiry, encouraging the teachers to ask the best questions, to ask the correct questions, and encouraging the teachers to be able to collect data and then collaborate together, supported by the institution, where we can think, how can we support teachers to figure out some of the issues in their own context? Not tell them this is how you do it, but actually give them some tools and allow them to come up with best practice together, because teachers are resourceful, and they have proven to be resourceful over the past 12 months. And I think we cannot go back to a previous context and pretend none of this happened. We do have to embrace the new reality, I suppose, and the opportunities in it. So I want to finish with William Shakespeare. Things without all remedy should be without regard. What's done is done. We cannot fix some of the things which have happened. The genie is out of the bottle in some of these cases. Some students are sick of online learning. That's fine. We have to deal with that. Some institutions will want to use hybrid. That's fine. Let's go with that. But what the institutions have to focus on is supporting the teacher to create models of best practice in their context, and supporting the learners as well, because all of this is quite new to the learners. So we do have to ensure that they are on board and they're trained as well in what they're doing. So that is it. Some teachers are sick of online. I know it. That is it. If anybody wants to ask questions, you can put them in the Q&A. You see your Q&A box up there. Teacher training and development are essential, not only continuous, but also initial training, definitely. So if you've got questions, we've got a couple of minutes. If you want to ask some questions, people are putting questions in the chat. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Oh, positive. Let me go back through some of the chat. I don't think there was any other questions in the chat. Were there some great points in the chat? I would really recommend having a read of it. No questions. Amazing. Tim, you have a question.
I do actually. There's also one that's come in from Carol as well, so maybe you do that one first. And
yeah, perfect. Has anyone found a way to encourage students to keep webcams on in online classes? Obviously, everybody's welcome to answer that. I wrote a course for Niall last year on moving your school online, and during the rollout of this course, or the tutoring of this course, it came up again and again, the webcams thing, and it was a lot of schools just make it an issue, make it an actual rule. If you don't have your webcam on, you can't come into class, because it is a safeguarding issue with students having their cameras off but watching everybody else. So yeah, a lot of schools just made it, you don't have a webcam, you either have to have a really good excuse that you've brought up directly to the teacher or the school, or you can't come into class. So, because everybody has a phone, I suppose. The excuses spread was the issue we had, and I told them all will be assessed on body language. There was a Wi-Fi issue, and that was when you do have to take into account, okay, maybe your Wi-Fi is, but it's case by case. But students can't just say the camera's on Monday, but it's not on Tuesday. Thank you for your time, guys. Thank you, Michael.
There's some more questions also in the
sorry,
Q&A.
I didn't look at the Q&A. I was basking in the thanks.
I'm not letting you get away with it yet.
I tell it. So Jonathan's asked practical ideas about what? Practical ideas for living, for social distancing, or for all of these. Like we could do a whole day of practical ideas for these, but it's really tricky to. I don't know your context. I know people are coming in from all over the world, and this is why I really do try to avoid saying this is what you should do. Distance classroom, practical ideas for distance classroom. God, how do we do that really quickly? With the distance classroom, what I have found is interaction patterns. Certain interaction patterns don't work, so the teachers have to utilize technology in order to allow the students to communicate clearly with each other. So frequently people are using Google Documents for collaborative writing. Obviously, the classroom is living in Google Classroom or something like that. They're using Vocaroo or voice recording for communication tasks. It really does depend on what your students will go for, what level they are, and how you're going to do that. But I've found, so I was doing a lot of teaching in a socially distant classroom, and it was really a case of trying to think, how can I achieve that learning outcome in that kind of way on a day-by-day basis almost. I'm sorry, I don't have an answer straight away for you. It would be a case that we'd have to sit down and go, let's look at that learning outcome. Let's look at that learning outcome. Oh, sorry. Do you have any recommended activities to help the distance classroom, the DC, I like it, stay dynamic? Do I have off the top? To be honest with you, when our teachers were looking at it, it was a lot of the stuff which they had used in the online classroom. So even stuff like Kahoot, and don't over Kahoot students, but even stuff like Kahoot or stuff like Padlet, stuff where they can integrate and they can use the technology to stay dynamic in some sort of way. I've used a lot of static standing exercises. So you can do speed dating, but the students are standing 2 meters apart and they just move. They're not touching desks or touching chairs, but they're standing and it's like a controlled mingle, I was calling it, which I don't think is actually really true. But yeah, you can do all of the stuff you're doing. Like in my classroom that I was using, I was doing a race to the board, but I had 2 boards. So they were racing in 2 different directions, if that makes sense. So I was still doing some of this stuff, but it was a case of using the space in the best possible way. Greg, kind of a rhetorical question, but how much tech is too much in the classroom? I feel like a lot of tech is intrusive. So I've been to, I think it was Russell Stannard did the plenary for Equals at the weekend, and he was saying use about 6 different tools, but use the hell out of them. So pick about 6 different tools that you say they're my go-to tools. They cover a multitude of sins as such, but use them a lot. So he was showing us how to use Padlet for voice recording and stuff like that. And Padlet, is one big tool that you can use for loads of things. So I would definitely, it's like teaching vocabulary to lower levels. Once you get beyond 6, I think it's you're overloading a little bit too much. So I have around 6. I think that I would use more and more, and then every now and again I might integrate one more or something like that. Elizabeth, class notebook in Teams is really good. Yes, I would agree. Lachlan, how do you manage diagnostic testing differently if the teaching learning is entirely online? So the diagnostic testing, and this is us, so I don't know if everybody does it, but students, we use a Google Forms. So the students will be sent the Google form, which is a grammar and vocab question test, and they have a writing part of it. So they do that, and then they do a follow-up speaking. And then we check, does the speaking tally with the grammar results? If the grammar results are off the scale and the speaking doesn't match it, then we ask questions about, the test. But yeah, obviously it's not perfect, but this is how some language skills help me doing it. And finally, any suggestions for preventing the use of L1 in the online classroom? So for online class and face-to-face class, I always like to do like the Harry Potter houses exercise, if that makes sense. So at the start of the week, I'll put students into, house red, house blue, house Targaryen, or whatever. If a student uses their L1, their house loses points. And if they win the game at the end of the class or whatever, their house gets more points. And at the end of the week, there might be a special reward, whatever your class might like. If no homework is seen as a reward, whatever, or if extra homework is seen as a reward, or something or the reward might just be they won. So it's that kind of group shaming that I try to use to avoid L1 use. But it's obviously it works sometimes and doesn't work sometimes. Tim, I think I brought the ship home on time. Did I?
Absolutely, perfectly on time. Yeah,
a Mongol. I like it.
I know there's portmanteaus all over the place going on.
Yeah, there really is. Let me see
that. Yeah.
Excellent.
Anything else that can come in? We've got another minute, but if not, then a big thank you to Chris for your time and for your presentation. Whipped through, like you said, a whole range of things which can lead to a whole range more talks and sessions, and that's the nature of this at the moment, isn't it? We've opened a box and there's a load of things in it, and we need to explore them.
You'd figure out which ones are good.
Exactly, yeah. And thanks to all of you for joining us from all around the world as well. Great to see the comments coming in from, I think we saw Philippines in there, we saw Italy, brilliant. This is what we want this day to be about. A very, very, very large community of practice with ELT practitioners from all over the world. And this is just the first of a whole day of sessions. So please do join us for the next one. We'll be starting at 10 o'clock. There's 3 different electives for you to choose from. We also have a coffee break at 10:30. So after the next session, feel free to join us. We'll have lots of breakout rooms where you can chat with fellow practitioners from all across the world. Yeah, enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Tim. Thanks,
Chris.
Bye.